So up to now, we've looped over data and written if statements to count one thing or another. But really what you want to do is be able to count multiple things so that you can compare them. Like, are there more boys or girls or whatever that have some quality? So that's what we're going to do in this section. So in order to do this, basically what I want to do is just have multiple counter variables. So instead of just having count, have a few of them. So let me just show you in this code section. So let's say I want to go through and I want to count. My goal is, do more boy or girl names end in Y? I'm like, who knows the answer? So we'll use the computer. So what I'm going to do is introduce two count variables. So outside the loop, whereas before I just said count equals 0, I'm just going to use the simple form of calling my variables count1, count2, and so on. Pretty unimaginative, but it's simple. So in this case, I'm going to have two variables. So I'll say count1 equals 0 and count2 equals 0. And my intention is that, well, in count1, I'll keep track of the boy case, and in count2, I'll keep track of the girl case. So inside the loop, this looks very much like what we did before. So I have an if test where I'm looking for rows where the name ends with Y and the gender is boy. And so when that's true, I'll bump up count1. So count1 being sort of the boy counter. And then following it, I have a very similar if statement that looks for a name ending in Y, but I'm looking for a gender equals girl. And in that case, I'll bump up count2. So the loop runs, and it's just going to be counting up the girl. It's at the same time, it's counting up the boy and girl cases. And then when it gets to the end here, and I'll just run it, then it just says boy count count 1 and girl count count 2. So we see it turns out more girl names end in Y than boy names or whatever. Obviously, with this form, you can test any number of things. One thing I should point out is that this is going to be sort of our official class format for how complicated I want to make things. So I've got the one loop, and then I could have generally just 2 or 3 variables, but any number of variables, I set them to 0 out here. And then for each one, I have an if statement. And I want to point out the if statements are one after another. And in fact, the order doesn't really matter. What I would point out is the if statements are not inside of each other. I'm not going to do that. That's more complicated. The stuff we can do perfectly interesting work just sticking with this form. All right, so let me just try a natural extension of this. So we could just go to 3 variables. I'll just show you how that would work. So for 3 variables, I'm just going to stick with my trivial naming convention, count 1, count 2, count 3. So I set these 3 variables to 0 outside the loop. And in this case, the question I want to answer is, do more names end in A or I or O? Who knows? So I've got the 3 counters, and I'll use count 1 to count the A case, and count 2 for the I case, and count 3 for the O case. So here's the sort of obvious if statement. If name ends with A, and then inside it says count 1 equals count 1 plus 1. And then likewise, there's an if statement for the I case that bumps up count 2, and an if statement for the O case that bumps up count 3. And then here I've got the 3 print statements outside the loop. So these run, right? The loop has to have completed, so it's bumped up all the counters to whatever they're going to be, and then we just print them out. So let's try it. Oh, so it's interesting. So A totally dominates. 377. I and O are just like, whatever. Thanks for playing. Nice try. Just a little bit of stylistic thing I'll point out here. My naming convention here is, it's kind of lame, just 1, 2, 3. Another way we could have done this is, in this case, we could have called this one count A and count I. I like this. Count A and count I. So it would be more mnemonic of what it was counting. But then it has the disadvantage that whenever you copy paste it or switch from one example to another, you would have to remember to rename. So I decided to just go with this very trivially simple, just 1, 2, 3 scheme. But we could have done something more complicated there. The other thing I'll point out is that it's natural, it's fine to use copy-paste for these, so you kind of get your first case working and then you paste it in. However, when you do that, there's this very natural error where you have to be really careful that you're manipulating the right variable, so that in this if statement, I'm manipulating count 1, and in this if statement, I'm manipulating count 2, and so on. So that's the sort of thing that having the mnemonic variable names might help with, but that is, no matter what you're doing, it's a common error, so you just have to be a little bit careful about that. All right, so now that we've got the ability to count multiple things, I want to expand our data set a little bit. So I did this survey, which actually I'll bring up here. So in Google Spreadsheets, since everything is just intrinsically online, it works really well for sharing data and doing easy stuff. So it has this feature where you can put up a little sort of form survey in front of people. So I made this trivial survey where I asked gender and favorite color and favorite TV show and so on. And I just sent this out to my class. And the way it works is every time someone submitted a set of answers, and this is anonymous, it would go into this spreadsheet. And so this is a Google Docs spreadsheet. And what you see is it's a table. So here's a column for gender, and here's a column for color, and these are just the answers. And you see is that every time someone types in an answer to the survey, that just goes in as one row. And so we have data to sort of play around with. We have favorite color, favorite TV show, favorite book, and whatnot. What I found is that it's easiest to do stuff with color and sport and favorite soda drink because there's enough repetition there. If you look at book, there's just so many books published that most books just appear once. Anyway, this is interesting data to look at, just see what's going on with people who are, I guess, about 20 years old in 2012. From Google Spreadsheets, you can export that data in CSV format. I think I mentioned that before. It's a really common interchange format. And I just cleaned up the data a little bit. So I removed dots. There was a problem where people would type in Dr. Pepper either with a dot after the first R or not. So I just removed all the dots. But other than that, the data just looks like whatever people typed in. So with that data, we can do all sorts of kind of interesting problems. So here I've set some up. This data is available as survey-2012.csv, so we can load that into a table. There's a function I haven't talked about before that the table has called convert to lowercase. And what that does is it goes through the table and it modifies all the text to just be lowercase letters. So for example, if we wanted to count, how many people have blue as their favorite color? Well, there's this problem that did they type uppercase B blue or lowercase, all uppercase or whatever. So by calling this function, we just, all the data is now going to be lowercase. So we just don't have to think about that variation of what people typed. So I'm going to do that as a simplification here. All right, so let me look at, so there's some sample problems here, and as usual, we've got the solutions available. So I'll just try these out. So it says, write code to print the soda field of each row. So what I'm going to do here, I could just print the whole row, but it's so much data, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But what could be interesting is suppose you were curious about what people put for the soda data. What you could say is get field, and then you need to know what the names of the fields are. They're printed somewhere up here. Anyway, the name of the field with the soda drink answer is soda. So I'm just going to print those, and I'm not going to count anything. I'll comment that out. So if I just print that, what we get is it just goes through all the rows, and remember, now it's all lowercase, and we can just kind of see what's there. This may be a good first step if you sort of want to see, what things seem to come up a lot, or just kind of if you're just curious about TV shows or movies or whatever people put in. This also shows, I guess, ultimately that row.getField really does just return a string. And so print understands strings, so if we just put it there, it just prints them. All right, so what I'd like to do is count the favorite sodas. So I want to say, I'm just going to say, well, Sprite, Dr. Pepper, and Coke. Let's count those three. So what I'm going to do is, following my previous strategy, I'll say count 1 equals 0, and count 2 equals 0, and count 3 equals 0. And so my intention is that I'll follow whatever the order is here. What do I say? Sprite, Dr. Pepper, and Coke. So what do I want to say? If row.getField soda is equal to Sprite, and I can just write it in lowercase letters because I know the data has been changed. So then I'll say count 1 is equal to count 1 plus 1. So that's counting one drink. I'll just try it. So this is count Sprite. Print count 1. And I'm going to get rid of this line. I'm not going to print all the sodas as we go. Okay, let's try that one. Okay, Sprite 8. So that seems to work. So I want to check it because then I'm going to do some merciless copy paste. So then I'm going to count Dr. Pepper. And I'm going to manipulate count 2 in that case. And then I'm going to count Coke. Manipulate count 3. So this is the case I was saying where you'd have to be careful. Copy paste is great, but you got to make sure you're doing the right thing. And then here I'll make 2 copies of this line. So then this is going to be Dr. Pepper, count 2, and Coke, count 3. I should say there was one other cleanup I did in the data. Try running this. Okay. That looks right. One is people spelled Coke sometimes they're at Coca-Cola with a dash or not or whatever. So I just changed those all to Coke. So this is a different data set, but this is following kind of my earlier example of counting 3 things. So that works pretty well. So the case the complexity I'd like to work out is like, well, really, if you look at the data, sometimes people would say Coke, and sometimes they would say Diet Coke, and sometimes they would say Dr. Pepper, and sometimes they would say Diet Dr. Pepper. So how could I get count 2, let's say, to include both? I want to include Dr. Pepper and also Diet Dr. Pepper. And the way to make it more inclusive there is to use the or. Oops. So I'm going to say or. Just grab this, just as we've done before. I'll say, well, if soda says Dr. Pepper or Diet Dr. Pepper. And then I'll do the same thing for this. I'll just copy all this. So I'm going to say Diet Sprite. Oops, Diet typo, Diet Sprite, Diet Dr. Pepper, and here we'll say or Diet Coke. All right, so without diet, it was 848. Assuming this code is correct, that's right. So you see, so it was 848. So then Dr. Pepper. So interestingly, no one drinks Diet Sprite in my class apparently, or likes it their best. So Dr. Pepper went up from 4 to 7, so it about doubled, and actually Coke also about doubled. So I guess that we've learned something a little bit there that for those drinks, diet represents about half. So I also obviously like this example because now we're sort of combining multiple techniques, that we're doing the counting, and then we're doing things like using or, and, or whatever on the if test that's controlling the count inside the loop. Okay, so let me try, these are kind of, non-trivial examples. Let me try another one. Let's try another one of the fields. Let's try the sport field. So this is where people, there were a bunch of different sports identified, but I'm going to look at the sports of soccer and football, were common ones identified. So I'll just use count 1 and count 2. So I'll say if sport is equal to soccer, let's say we'll do that one in count 1, and otherwise, or football, that's the other one, so that one we'll do in count 2. So here we'll say soccer and football, and this count 3 I'm just going to stop doing. Okay, so we're going to, so this should just go through and count how many times soccer was the sport that was named, and how many times football, and then that should just work. So you see we've got soccer 7, football 12, so football's pretty significantly ahead there. So the last thing I want to try here is, well, we also have this gender data. So what I want to do is let's just take this 7 number for soccer and let's break it down by gender. And so the way, when I say break it down, what I'm doing is like, well, let's have one counter for women playing soccer and one counter for men playing soccer. So let's say count 1 will be women playing soccer. So what do I do here? And this is going to be an and. So I say, well, if it's row dot get field gender, and then you have to know how the data is coded. In this case, the data is coded as female, is the word for used for that. So count 1 is going to be answers, where the row is also where they said claimed female, and here I'll say soccer and male, and so that'll go into count 2. So here I'll say soccer female, and then here I'll say soccer M. Okay, so let's try that. So soccer without looking at gender, it was 7. So now if I look at it, you see there was a huge gender breakdown. So I don't know if maybe there's just a lot of women's soccer team people in my class this quarter, or who knows. But anyway, yeah, so of those 7, 6 were female, and there was 1 male who identified soccer as their favorite sport to play. So this is just another example of using, combining the counting with and or. My previous one was or. This one I used and. So that's sort of as complicated as I want to get with this table data. I think it has a nice, very kind of realistic feeling that you have data set, and then the computer rips over it with a little bit of this logic that you write, and then eventually just comes up with a couple numbers that are going to help you analyze what's going on. So that's a very realistic way that computers are used, and an excellent format for writing exercises.